James Bascom with the American Defense for Tradition, Family, and Property is back on the show to talk about freeing Cuba. What is going on in Cuba, and why should Americans stand up in defense of our Cuban brothers and sisters? Find out now.
Can you give us an update on what is the current status in this shouting for freedom, this desire for the people to have freedom there?
Yes, basically for 62 years, the Cuban people have been suffering under a terrible communist regime there, right under the nose, almost literally, of the United States of America. Over 100,000 Cubans have died as a result of the communist regime. About two-thirds of those have died drowning at sea, and the rest have directly been killed, executed, or killed because of the policies of the communist regime, the Castroite, the Fidel and Raul Castro's regime in Cuba. And it's completely unacceptable for this to be happening so close to the United States. And for the longest time, there were protests here in the United States. There were anti-communist organizations that have opposed it. But over the last few months, there have been massive protests across the island of Cuba against the regime, demanding freedom from dictatorship, from communist dictatorship, which has inspired the Cuban Americans in the United States to protest, and for anti-communist Americans to see how outrageous it is that we have tolerated this regime for so long. And it's really inspired a lot of groups to do something. And our group, Tradition, Family, Property, which has a long history of opposing communism in the United States and across the world, has started a petition and a campaign to call for the United States government to do something concrete to finish once and for all with this communist regime in Cuba.
Mr. James Bascom, this is Adrian. I was wondering, often people will say, oh, well, petitions. I don't want to sign a petition. I'm just going to get put on an email list, and it doesn't actually do anything. So how do you say, what's the point of signing a petition?
No, petitions do work. We have a long history of successfully fighting against socialist policies and so forth with petitions. They do work. The left knows that, and they certainly know that themselves. And so we're collecting online petition at our website, tfb.org/free Cuba. That's T as in tradition, family, F as in family, P as in property.org/free Cuba. And we already have over 56,000 signatures, and our goal is 100,000 signatures to demand action from the United States government against Cuba. It's interesting how there's such a hypocrisy about illegal immigration, right? There's no illegal immigrant that comes across the southern border, the land border, that Joe Biden and the Democrats don't like, right? They love as many as possible, right? But why is it that they want to turn back and in fact send back Cuban refugees who are truly refugees, fleeing from communism, from death, and from prison? Why are they turned back? Why does the left dislike that? Because Cuba has a special place in the heart of the left, and that's the deeper reason why we're calling for the downfall of the regime in Cuba, and because Cuba has a special place, and it provides kind of a enthusiasm and a model even for the international left. They love Cuba, always have loved communist Cuba, and look to Cuba almost as a beacon of hope, if you will, for the left. Bernie Sanders, AOC, liberation theologians across Latin America and the United States and the world look to Cuba as kind of a model. And so this is our chance to smash this horrible system and this model for the international left.
I don't know how much of a model it would actually be. They have to import some 70% of their food onto the island because they are incapable of producing it for themselves. And the argument goes, well, the Americans have these sanctions against the island that not only sanctions Cuba, but it sanctions other countries that do business in Cuba as well. Obama went lenient on that. Trump reinforced it. We're not sure where Biden is in all this, but we do know this. In Iran, in Egypt, and in other parts of our world, when the people rised up, big tech came to help. They came to help provide internet access and whatever. 2 weeks ago, it was asked of the Biden administration whether or not they would provide such assistance to the people of Cuba and their effort, because the Cuban government locked down the internet, using China as an ally in the effort to put a big, roadblock to internet access to the people. The FCC has apparently approved the effort to help the Cubans, and still the Biden administration hasn't moved on that. The days are gone when we would openly oppose communism and spread freedom everywhere. Why do you think that's the case? Or do you believe that's the case? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think after the end of the Cold War, there was this complacency that kind of settled in, and state-sponsored communism was falsely thought to have disappeared, and it never did. It continued in China, continued in North Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, and it's something that people thought that communism died. It never died. It actually continued to evolve, and its fruits are critical race theory, the whole LGBT revolution, which is all fruit of socialism and communism, the hatred of the traditional family, and so forth. And so, the situation in Cuba, the role that Cuba plays in the communist world, and the whole global left, is very, very important. And this is a golden opportunity for those who oppose communism to basically smash the head of the serpent here in the Americas, which is Cuba, and it's really very important, because I would say that there are more and more Americans. The left is radicalizing very quickly, as everyone can see, right? And they're even becoming explicitly in favor of socialism or even communism. But the right is becoming more and more radical as well. And this is a golden opportunity to deal a mortal blow, to show the evil of socialism and communism as it's practiced in the real world. And if we can do away with the communist regime in Cuba once and for all, that would deal a mortal blow to the left in the United States. There would be a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth among the left if Cuba were to fall, and it explains why, for so long, the left has been the greatest apologists for the Cuban regime, the communist regime there.
So what exactly is the public perception of the situation in Cuba for Americans, but also for Cubans? I know at universities we see people wearing Che Guevara T-shirts all the time, and I would imagine most people don't even know who he is. They just wear it because it's revolutionary. But who was Che Guevara, and what's the public perception of the situation in Cuba?
Yeah, Che Guevara. He was basically he was an Argentine communist who was almost like a Taliban of communism. In the 1960s, went around trying to overthrow governments. Was personally a murderer. Had women and children executed. Really, just a cruel, evil man. And people don't realize how evil he was. Well, people know how evil he was, but some people are just ignorant. But the situation in Cuba continues to be just as bad. There are people who flee the island until today. A friend of mine, Cuban American, has said that his relatives in Cuba said, "Don't send money anymore because there's nothing to buy. There's no medicine or even food to buy. Send aspirin, send Tylenol, send basic medical supplies." This is the same country that we're told by Bernie Sanders that has the best medical care in the world, right? Or has some of the best doctors in the world. They don't even have aspirin to be sold in shops. Things are so bad there in Cuba. So it's really, a lot of Americans think, well, it's over there, and we're over here, and we should try to take care of our problems first. Well, if you want to deal a major blow to the left here in the United States, fight to destroy the communist regime in Cuba. Mr.
James Bascom is our guest. He is with Tradition Family and Property. I want to ask about the church and her response to these protests, this uprising in Cuba by the people wanting freedom from this regime. I know His Holiness was coming out of the hospital, but he did make a statement seeming to suggest that the church was close to the Cubans. And I know the bishops, especially in America, I think they put out a statement also saying that they were in solidarity. But is this enough? Should there be more? What say you, Mr. James Bascom?
I mean, it was definitely not enough. I mean, Pope Francis gave a statement that was very, very vague and very generic, but it should be much, much more. I mean, he should call for the end to the regime, call for the uprising of the Cuban people against their oppressors, their true oppressors. You know, this is a pope who is always talking about oppressors, right, and always talking about the oppressed all throughout the world. Well, if there's a people anywhere in the world, certainly in the Americas, that is oppressed, it's the Cuban people. The Cuban people. And they need freedom. They need freedom, especially freedom for the church, because there is no freedom for the church. The church in Cuba is essentially a department of the government, controlled, spied upon, and completely dominated by the communist regime, unable to preach anything that contradicts communist ideology. You know, imagine if your local priest had to report to the local KGB agent, you know, to get his sermons and what he's preaching approved. That's the reality in Cuba. So the Vatican and the Catholic bishop, the Catholic Church in the United States have to take a much, much stronger, they really need to take a much stronger stance against the regime, but that is at war with religion. Communism is atheistic, and it's at war with religion. And we as Catholics in America must take a stronger position as Catholics to want to destroy and overthrow the regime there.
No, it seems like this moment, like why this moment? In over 6 decades, we're finally seeing the people rise up against communism. Now, I know that there were some contributing factors. I mean, the 2020 COVID worldwide lockdown seemed to take a major toll upon the people. Their sources of revenue there with tourism died out, and it really put a hurt on those left to try to make their way through all of that. And I've seen footage of massive bread lines, not enough resources to go around. I think the people are just fed up with an economic and social structure that has always been incredibly oppressive and difficult, and they just seem to be ready for freedom. How do you see this playing out, Mr. Bascom?
Yeah, I think the Cuban people have reached a breaking point. When they reach a breaking point, they're so crushed by oppression, by the misery of communism, and they know that their best hope for freedom is with God-fearing Americans. And the countries of Cuba and the United States have always been very close. We're geographically very close, and it's up to American Catholics and God-fearing Americans to do something to help our Cuban brothers and sisters there on the island. And if we, I really cannot emphasize this enough, if we don't do something to destroy this evil regime, we are going to find ourselves in America facing a similar situation sooner or later.
Now, Cuban Americans have marched on D.C. They went out in front of the White House and they tried to make their voices heard. Do you think that is going to be effective?
I think the louder and the more we demand of our government, if enough people get out there and demand that this action be taken, I think the United States government will have no choice but to do something. But the key is getting out there demanding that we do something.
We have about 3 minutes left with Mr. James Bascom with the American Society for Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property, TFP, about the campaign against communism in Cuba. And, we're talking about we need to go out and do something, but what exactly can we do? Most people are sitting at home or driving in their cars, and what can we do to help our friends and family in Cuba? I know my youth minister from when I was in high school, he would tell us about how his family practically swam from Cuba to Florida and talked to us about the evils in communism in Cuba, and that really affected me and set me straight with what's going on in Cuba from an early age. But what can we do as Americans?
Well, the first thing we can do is pray and offer our sacrifices for the Cuban people and for the overthrow of the regime. That's the first and most important thing we can do, to pray the rosary and to offer up all of our sacrifices and prayers for that intention. The second is to sign our petition, tfp.org/freecuba. We have almost 60,000 signatures there. We're hoping to get 100,000, and we're going to present those signatures at the White House pretty soon. Then we can contact our elected officials, our congressmen, and demand action on Cuba. The more pressure we can put to our elected officials, the more likely things are actually going to happen. And fourth, we can often join local protests in many big cities, in Houston, in New Orleans, in Washington, in New York. There have been large protests of not just Cuban Americans, but Venezuelan Americans, Colombian Americans, all these different peoples that have come from regimes or countries where socialism has taken root. And they know very well that this is what leads. This is where communism leads, and they've all told me something I've heard many times. If America falls into socialism or communism, there's no place left to go.
Wow.
There's no place left to go. Where will we go if America goes down that road?
Yeah, so let that sink in.
Here.
We are out of time, though.
If you like that interview, then be sure to check out some of our other interviews that you might find fascinating. And don't forget to like and subscribe and share this interview with someone that you think will find this informative and inspiring. God love you.